Officer Marcus Rodriguez had been with the SWAT team for 8 years, and he thought he had seen everything. The morning of September 15th started like any other day at the downtown precinct. Marcus grabbed his coffee, checked his gear, and prepared for what seemed like routine security detail. The briefing was straightforward: provide additional security support for a diplomatic event at the Grand Hotel downtown. The assignment felt almost boring compared to the high-stakes raids and hostage situations Marcus usually handled. Foreign dignitaries were visiting the city, and local police needed extra manpower to ensure everything went smoothly. Marcus and his team were told to maintain a low profile, stay alert, and follow the lead of the Diplomatic Security Service. When they arrived at the luxury hotel, Marcus noticed the elaborate setup immediately. Red carpets lined the entrance, velvet ropes created organized pathways, and security personnel from multiple agencies filled every corner. The building buzzed with activity as staff members rushed to prepare for the arrival of several international guests. Marcus positioned himself near the main entrance, watching as various officials in expensive suits moved through the lobby. His radio crackled with constant updates about arrival times and security protocols. Everything seemed routine until a convoy of black vehicles pulled up outside. The first person to step out wore an ornate uniform that Marcus had never seen before. Gold braiding covered the shoulders, polished metals decorated the chest, and a ceremonial sword hung at the side. This was clearly someone important, though Marcus had not been briefed about anyone of this particular significance. The uniformed figure moved with practiced precision, taking position near the hotel entrance. Marcus observed the rigid posture, and the way other security personnel seemed to defer to this individual. The elaborate uniform suggested military background, but the ceremonial nature indicated a more formal role. As more vehicles arrived and additional personnel took their positions, Marcus felt the tension in the air increase. Radio chatter became more frequent, and everyone seemed to be moving with heightened awareness. The diplomatic event was clearly more significant than the initial briefing had suggested. Marcus checked his equipment one more time and settled into his assigned position. He had handled dozens of similar assignments without incident, and he expected this day to follow the same pattern. The presence of so many different security agencies created a complex environment, but everyone seemed to know their role. The ornately uniformed individual remained near the entrance, occasionally speaking into a small communication device. Marcus noticed the precise movements and the way this person scanned the surroundings with professional intensity. Whatever role this individual served, it was clearly one of significant responsibility. As the morning progressed, more distinguished guests arrived at the hotel. Each arrival brought additional protocol requirements and security adjustments. Marcus found himself increasingly impressed by the coordination required to manage such a complex event. The uniformed figure continued to maintain position near the entrance, occasionally coordinating with other security personnel. Marcus observed the professional demeanor and the obvious experience this person brought to the assignment. The elaborate uniform clearly represented something important, though Marcus remained uncertain about the specific details. By late morning, the lobby had filled with diplomats, security personnel, and hotel staff. The atmosphere was formal and controlled, with everyone following carefully planned procedures. Marcus felt confident in his team's ability to handle whatever the day might bring. The radio crackled again with updates about the next phase of arrivals. Marcus adjusted his position slightly and continued his observation of the surroundings. The ornately uniformed individual remained at the entrance, maintaining the same professional stance that had been evident all morning. Everything appeared to be proceeding according to plan, and Marcus allowed himself to think that this might be one of the easier assignments his team had handled recently. The coordination between different agencies seemed smooth, and all the security protocols were functioning as intended. Little did Marcus know that the events of the next few hours would change his career forever and create an international incident that would make headlines around the world. The routine assignment was about to become anything but routine. The situation began to change around noon when a disturbance erupted near the hotel's side entrance. Marcus heard shouting through his radio and saw several security personnel rushing toward the commotion. His training kicked in immediately, and he moved to provide support while maintaining awareness of his primary assignment. As Marcus approached the side entrance, He could see a crowd gathering around what appeared to be an unauthorized individual attempting to enter the building. The person was arguing loudly with security guards and appeared to be intoxicated or under the influence of something. The situation was escalating quickly. The ornately uniformed individual from the main entrance had also moved toward the disturbance. Marcus watched as this person attempted to restore order by speaking firmly to the disruptive individual. However, the situation continued to deteriorate as more people gathered to watch the confrontation. Marcus positioned himself strategically to assist if needed while keeping his radio open for instructions. The crowd was growing larger, and the disruptive individual was becoming increasingly aggressive. Hotel security appeared overwhelmed, and the diplomatic security service was requesting immediate assistance. Without warning, the disruptive individual suddenly lunged toward the ornately uniformed figure. Marcus saw the movement and reacted instinctively, moving quickly to intercept what he perceived as a potential attack on someone who was clearly an important official. In the chaos of the moment, Marcus reached out to restrain what he thought was an aggressor. His hand made contact with the ornate uniform, and he applied pressure to prevent what appeared to be an assault. The crowd gasped, and suddenly everyone in the immediate area froze. The uniformed individual turned toward Marcus with an expression of complete shock and disbelief. The elaborate uniform, the medals, and the ceremonial sword suddenly took on new significance as Marcus realized he had just made physical contact with someone of obvious importance. Radio chatter exploded with urgent communications. Security personnel from multiple agencies converged on the scene, their faces showing varying degrees of alarm and confusion. Marcus found himself surrounded by officials, who seemed to be speaking in several different languages. The disruptive individual who had started the whole incident was quickly removed from the scene by hotel security. However, the focus had now shifted entirely to Marcus and his contact with the ornately uniformed figure. The atmosphere had changed from controlled professionalism to barely contained crisis. Marcus tried to explain his actions through the growing crowd of security personnel. He emphasized that he had perceived a threat and had acted to protect what appeared to be an important official. However, his explanations seemed to be making the situation worse rather than better. The uniformed individual remained silent but clearly agitated. Other officials were speaking rapidly in hushed tones, occasionally glancing toward Marcus with expressions of concern. The diplomatic security service was making urgent phone calls, and additional personnel continued to arrive at the scene. Marcus began to understand that he had seriously misread the situation. The elaborate uniform, the ceremonial sword, and the deference shown by other security personnel all pointed to someone of significant importance. His attempt to provide protection had somehow created a major incident. His radio crackled with instructions to remain in position while supervisors were contacted. Marcus could see his team members exchanging concerned glances as they tried to understand what had happened. The routine assignment had suddenly become a potential international crisis. The hotel lobby had cleared of most guests, and the diplomatic event appeared to be temporarily suspended. Security personnel were establishing a perimeter around the area where the incident had occurred. Marcus found himself at the center of a situation that was growing more serious by the minute. Additional officials in expensive suits began arriving at the hotel. Their serious expressions and urgent conversations suggested that word of the incident was spreading quickly through diplomatic channels. Marcus realized that his split-second decision to intervene had created consequences far beyond anything he had anticipated. The ornately uniformed individual finally spoke, but not to Marcus directly. Instead, this person addressed the diplomatic security personnel in what sounded like formal, measured language. The tone suggested official protocol was being invoked to address the situation. Marcus watched as his supervisors arrived at the scene and immediately began discussions with the diplomatic officials. The expressions on their faces told him everything he needed to know about the severity of the situation. His career, and possibly much more, was now in jeopardy. The routine security assignment had transformed into an international incident, and Marcus found himself at the center of a diplomatic crisis that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. Captain Sarah Mitchell arrived at the hotel within 20 minutes of receiving the emergency call. Her face was grim as she surveyed the scene and immediately began speaking with the diplomatic security chief. Marcus watched from a distance as intense conversations took place between officials from multiple agencies. The truth about the ornately uniformed individual's identity came out during these urgent discussions. Marcus learned that he had made physical contact with a member of the royal guard from a European monarchy. The elaborate uniform, ceremonial sword, and medals all made sense now. This was personal security for visiting royalty. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had not simply touched an important official. He had made unauthorized contact with someone whose person was considered sacred by international diplomatic protocol. The gravity of his mistake became clear as he watched officials scrambling to manage the crisis. The Royal Guard member, whose name Marcus learned was Captain Edmund Hartwell, had been personally assigned to protect a visiting prince. The diplomatic visit was part of important trade negotiations between the two countries, and any incident involving the royal security detail could jeopardize months of careful preparation. Captain Mitchell approached Marcus with a serious expression. She explained that the situation had escalated beyond local law enforcement and was now being handled at the highest levels of government. The State Department had been contacted and diplomatic channels were being activated to address the incident. Marcus tried to explain his perspective again. He emphasized that he had seen what appeared to be an attack on an important official and had acted to prevent harm. However, Captain Mitchell explained that intentions were less important than results in diplomatic situations. The hotel had been effectively placed under heightened security, while officials determined how to proceed. The diplomatic event had been postponed indefinitely, and several international guests were expressing concern about the security arrangements. The incident was threatening to overshadow the entire visit. Captain Hartwell finally agreed to speak directly with Marcus, though only in the presence of multiple officials from both countries. The conversation was formal and carefully monitored, with every word being documented for official records. During this controlled interaction, Captain Hartwell explained the significance of his role in uniform. As a member of the Royal Guard, he served not just as security personnel but as a representative of the monarchy itself. Any unauthorized contact was considered a serious breach of protocol. Marcus listened as the cultural and legal implications were explained to him. In some circumstances, what he had done could be considered an international incident requiring formal diplomatic resolution. The fact that he had acted with good intentions provided some mitigation, but did not eliminate the seriousness of the breach. The media had somehow learned about the incident, and news crews were beginning to gather outside the hotel. Press officers from multiple agencies were working to control the narrative and prevent the situation from becoming a public relations disaster for both countries involved. Marcus began to understand that his actions had created ripple effects far beyond anything he could have imagined. Trade negotiations worth millions of dollars were potentially at risk. Diplomatic relationships that had been carefully cultivated over years were now being tested by his split-second decision. His team members were questioned extensively about the incident and the training they had received regarding diplomatic protocol. It became clear that the briefing for the assignment had been inadequate, given the level of international importance of the guests. The State Department representatives who arrived at the scene began working on damage control. They emphasized the need to resolve the situation quickly and quietly to prevent it from affecting the broader diplomatic relationship between the two countries. Captain Hartwell, despite being the victim of the protocol breach, showed remarkable professionalism throughout the discussions. He acknowledged that Marcus had acted with good intentions and expressed understanding of the challenging security environment that had led to the confusion. However, protocol was protocol, and the formal nature of diplomatic relations meant that the incident could not simply be dismissed as a misunderstanding. Official procedures had to be followed, and consequences had to be addressed through proper channels. Marcus realized that his law enforcement career might be over before the day was finished. The incident would become part of his permanent record, and it was unclear whether any agency would be willing to take the risk of employing someone involved in an international diplomatic crisis. The investigation into how the misunderstanding had occurred was already beginning. Questions were being raised about communication protocols, briefing procedures, and coordination between different security agencies. The incident was becoming a case study in how quickly routine assignments could become international crises. The internal investigation began immediately after the incident was contained. Marcus found himself removed from active duty, pending a full review of his actions and the circumstances that led to the diplomatic crisis. The weight of the situation pressed down on him as he sat in the conference room, waiting to give his formal statement. Detective Lieutenant James Harper was assigned to lead the investigation. His reputation for thoroughness and fairness gave Marcus some hope that the truth would come out. However, the political pressure surrounding the case meant that every detail would be scrutinized by officials far above Harper's pay grade. The first phase of the investigation focused on the events leading up to the incident. Security footage from multiple cameras was reviewed frame by frame. Every radio communication was analyzed. Every witness was interviewed separately to ensure their accounts were independent and accurate. Marcus provided a detailed timeline of his actions and observations. He explained how he had perceived the situation as a potential threat to an important official. The investigators seemed particularly interested in his training background and previous experience with diplomatic security assignments. The footage revealed several critical details that supported Marcus's account. The disruptive individual had indeed made aggressive movements toward Captain Hartwell. The crowd situation had created genuine chaos and confusion. Marcus's response time and positioning were consistent with standard security protocols. However, the investigation also revealed communication failures that had contributed to the misunderstanding. Marcus had not been properly briefed about the specific identity and status of the Royal Guard member. The chain of command for the event had multiple gaps that prevented crucial information from reaching all security personnel. Captain Hartwell was interviewed extensively about his perspective on the incident. His account was professional and measured, acknowledging the chaotic circumstances while maintaining that protocol had been breached. He expressed no personal animosity toward Marcus, but emphasized the seriousness of unauthorized contact. The diplomatic officials provided context about the broader implications of the incident. They explained how royal protocol worked and why certain procedures were considered inviolable. The investigation began to reveal the complex web of international relations that Marcus had unknowingly disrupted. Media attention intensified as news outlets picked up the story. Headlines ranged from sensational accounts of an assault on royalty to more measured reporting about security coordination failures. The pressure on all involved parties increased as the story gained national attention. Marcus's personal life was suddenly under scrutiny. Reporters attempted to contact his family and friends. His background was investigated by journalists looking for any angle that might explain or sensationalize the incident. The stress began to affect his sleep and his ability to focus on the investigation. The police department's public relations team worked overtime to manage the narrative. They emphasized Marcus's exemplary service record and his good intentions during the incident. However, they also had to acknowledge that proper procedures had not been followed. Internal Affairs expanded their investigation to include the entire security operation for the diplomatic event. They examined planning documents, communication protocols, and training records. The scope of the investigation grew as it became clear that systemic issues had contributed to the crisis. Captain Hartwell's government began their own investigation into the incident. They reviewed security arrangements and diplomatic protocols to determine whether their own procedures needed adjustment. The international nature of the case meant that multiple investigations were proceeding simultaneously. Marcus hired an attorney who specialized in law enforcement cases. The lawyer explained that while criminal charges were unlikely given the circumstances, his career prospects were still very much in jeopardy. Administrative actions could result in suspension, demotion, or termination. The investigation revealed that similar communication failures had occurred during previous diplomatic events, though none had resulted in actual incidents. This pattern suggested that the problems were systemic rather than individual, which provided some support for Marcus's defense. Witness statements from other security personnel painted a picture of confusion and inadequate coordination. Several officers reported that they had also been uncertain about protocols and chain of command during the event. Marcus was not the only one who had been inadequately briefed. The hotel's security team provided additional context about the incident. They confirmed that the disruptive individual had been behaving aggressively and that the situation had escalated rapidly. Their accounts supported Marcus's assessment that intervention had been necessary. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the incident was the result of multiple failures rather than one person's mistake. However, Marcus remained the focal point because his actions had created the actual diplomatic crisis. The question became whether he would bear full responsibility or whether the systemic failures would be acknowledged. The pressure from both governments to resolve the situation quickly complicated the investigation. Political considerations began to influence decisions about how to proceed, and Marcus found himself caught between competing interests that extended far beyond local law enforcement. 3 weeks after the incident, the formal consequences began to materialize. Marcus received notification that he was being suspended without pay, pending the completion of all investigations. The decision hit him hard, both financially and emotionally. As he struggled to maintain his family's stability during the uncertainty, the diplomatic ramifications continued to expand as both governments worked to prevent the incident from affecting their broader relationship. The trade negotiations that had brought the royal delegation to the city were postponed indefinitely, while officials assessed the security implications of the breach. Captain Hartwell's government issued a formal diplomatic protest through official channels. The document, which was eventually leaked to the press, described the incident as a serious breach of international protocol that required appropriate consequences and systemic changes to prevent future occurrences. The police department faced intense scrutiny from city officials and the media. The mayor called for a comprehensive review of security procedures for all diplomatic events. Several city council members demanded accountability at the highest levels of the department. Marcus's family struggled with the sudden loss of income and the public attention surrounding the case. His wife Sarah had to take a second job to make ends meet, while their 2 children faced questions and comments from classmates about their father's situation. The investigation expanded to include the federal agencies responsible for coordinating diplomatic security. Congressional oversight. Committees announced hearings to examine how communication failures had led to such a significant international incident. Legal experts began weighing in on the case. Through media appearances and opinion pieces, some argued that Marcus had acted appropriately given the information available to him. Others contended that his actions, regardless of intent, had violated international law and diplomatic immunity principles. The Royal Guard members' government sent a delegation to review security arrangements for future diplomatic visits. Their report was highly critical of the coordination between local and federal agencies, leading to new requirements for diplomatic security protocols. Marcus attended mandatory counseling sessions as part of the administrative process. The stress of the situation had begun to affect his mental health, and he struggled with feelings of guilt and uncertainty about his future. The counselor helped him process the complex emotions surrounding the incident. The media coverage began to divide along political lines. Some outlets portrayed Marcus as a scapegoat for systemic failures in diplomatic security. Others focused on the serious nature of his breach of protocol and the potential damage to international relations. His attorney filed appeals and motions challenging various aspects of the investigation and the suspension. The legal strategy focused on demonstrating that Marcus had acted reasonably, given the information available to him and the chaotic circumstances of the moment. The police union became involved in Marcus's defense, arguing that he was being unfairly blamed for failures at multiple levels of government. They organized support from other officers and began a public campaign to highlight the systemic issues that had contributed to the incident. Captain Hartwell made a surprising public statement expressing sympathy for Marcus's situation while maintaining that protocol violations could not be ignored. The statement was carefully worded to acknowledge the complexity of the situation without undermining his government's official position. The investigation revealed that similar incidents had occurred in other cities during diplomatic visits, though none had received the same level of attention. This pattern supported arguments that the problems were systemic rather than individual. but it also raised questions about why changes hadn't been made sooner. Marcus's training records were scrutinized in detail, revealing that he had received minimal instruction on diplomatic protocol, despite his assignment to security details involving foreign officials. This gap in training became a central element of his defense. The financial impact on Marcus's family continued to mount as legal fees accumulated, and the suspension dragged on. Community members and fellow officers organized fundraising efforts to help support the family. During the crisis, the State Department began developing new protocols for coordinating security at diplomatic events. The changes were designed to prevent communication failures and ensure that all personnel understood their roles and limitations when dealing with foreign officials. International law experts debated whether Marcus could face prosecution under various treaties and agreements. The complexity of diplomatic immunity law meant that multiple jurisdictions and legal frameworks were potentially applicable to the case. The incident became a case study in crisis management at the police academy, with instructors using it to illustrate how quickly routine situations could escalate into international crises. Marcus's actions were analyzed from multiple perspectives as part of training scenarios. Captain Hartwell's government began considering whether to pursue formal legal action through international courts. The decision would depend on the final outcomes of the various investigations and the adequacy of any corrective measures implemented by local authorities. As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself in a strange limbo, waiting for decisions that would determine his future while watching his life slowly unravel. The routine assignment that had seemed so ordinary just a month earlier had transformed into a career-ending crisis that affected not just him, but everyone around him. 2 months after the incident, an unexpected development changed everything. Captain Hartwell requested a private meeting with Marcus through diplomatic channels. The unusual request surprised everyone involved, as direct contact between the parties had been strictly limited during the investigation. The meeting took place at a neutral location, with representatives from both governments present. Marcus entered the room nervous and uncertain about what Captain Hartwell wanted to discuss. The formal atmosphere made every word feel weighted with potential consequences. Captain Hartwell began by explaining his perspective on the entire situation. He acknowledged that Marcus had acted with good intentions, and that the circumstances had been genuinely confusing. More importantly, he revealed that his own investigation had uncovered information that had not been shared with the other investigations. The Royal Guard member had discovered that the disruptive individual who had started the whole incident was actually part of a planned protest that had been intelligence agencies. The person had been specifically targeting the royal delegation, and Marcus's intervention had potentially prevented a more serious security breach. This revelation cast Marcus's actions in an entirely different light. Rather than being an overzealous officer who had breached protocol, he had actually done his job correctly by recognizing and responding to a genuine threat. The irony was that no one had realized the threat was real until weeks later. Captain Hartwell expressed his government's willingness to reconsider their position on the incident given this new information. While protocol had technically been breached, the circumstances now appeared to justify Marcus's actions from a security perspective. The news of this development spread quickly through official channels and eventually reached the media. The narrative surrounding the incident began to shift as people learned that Marcus had actually prevented a planned disruption of the diplomatic event. However, the situation remained complicated because the technical breach of protocol had still occurred. Diplomatic immunity and royal protocol were not designed to accommodate exceptions, even when those exceptions were justified by security concerns. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and frustration as the new information came to light. While it vindicated his assessment of the threat, it also highlighted how much his life had been disrupted by factors beyond his control. The damage to his career and his family's stability couldn't be easily undone. The police department found itself in an awkward position. They had suspended Marcus based on the apparent protocol violation, but now it seemed he had actually performed his duties correctly. The decision about how to proceed required careful consideration of both legal and political factors. Captain Hartwell's government began working with American officials to find a resolution that would acknowledge the complexity of the situation. They proposed a solution that would recognize both the protocol violation and the security justification for Marcus's actions. The media coverage became more sympathetic to Marcus as the full story emerged. Editorial writers and commentators began questioning whether he had been treated fairly given the circumstances. Public opinion started to shift in his favor. Marcus's attorney used the new information to file additional appeals and motions. The revelation that his client had actually identified and responded to a real threat provided strong grounds for challenging the suspension and other consequences. The investigation took on new dimensions as officials examined how the intelligence about the planned protest had been handled. Questions arose about why local security personnel had not been informed about the potential threat to the diplomatic event. Captain Hartwell made another public statement, this time more explicitly supportive of Marcus, while still acknowledging the importance of diplomatic protocol. The careful wording suggested that his government was looking for a way to resolve the situation without completely abandoning their principles. The police union intensified their support for Marcus, arguing that the new information proved he had been unfairly scapegoated. They demanded his immediate reinstatement and compensation for the wages he had lost during the suspension. The congressional hearings that had been scheduled to examine the incident became more complex as lawmakers struggled to balance competing interests. Some focused on the security failures that had led to the confusion, while others emphasized the importance of maintaining diplomatic protocol. Marcus began to hope that his career might be salvageable after all. The new information provided a path forward that could potentially restore his reputation and his job. However, he remained cautious about counting on any particular outcome. The State Department worked with both governments to develop new protocols that would address security threats while maintaining diplomatic immunity. The incident had revealed gaps in existing procedures that needed to be addressed to prevent future problems. Captain Hartwell's willingness to speak out in support of Marcus, despite the protocol breach, demonstrated remarkable professionalism and integrity. His actions helped create the possibility for a resolution that could satisfy both security and diplomatic concerns. As the various investigations and appeals moved forward, Marcus found himself cautiously optimistic for the first time since the incident. The truth about what had really happened was finally coming to light, and it painted his actions in a very different perspective than anyone had initially understood. 6 months after the incident, a formal resolution was reached through diplomatic negotiations. Marcus was reinstated to active duty with full back pay and an official commendation for preventing a security threat. The resolution acknowledged both the protocol violation and the justified nature of his actions. Captain Hartwell attended the ceremony where Marcus received his commendation. The two men had developed a mutual respect through their shared experience, and the Royal Guard member personally thanked Marcus for his professionalism throughout the ordeal. The diplomatic incident became a catalyst for significant improvements in security coordination procedures. New protocols were established to ensure better communication between local, federal, and international security agencies during diplomatic events. Marcus's experience was used as a case study for training programs. The police department implemented comprehensive changes to their diplomatic security briefing procedures. Officers assigned to such events now receive detailed information about all participants and clear guidelines about protocol requirements and security priorities. Marcus returned to his SWAT team duties but found that the incident had changed his perspective on law enforcement. He became an advocate for better training and communication procedures, using his experience to help prevent similar situations from affecting other officers. The media coverage of the resolution was extensive, with many outlets praising the diplomatic solution that had been reached. Marcus became something of a reluctant public figure, speaking at law enforcement conferences about crisis management and international cooperation. Captain Hartwell's government established new guidelines for their security personnel when operating in foreign countries. The incident had highlighted the need for better coordination and communication between different security cultures and legal systems. Marcus's family slowly recovered from the financial and emotional stress of the suspension period. His children, who had struggled with the public attention and uncertainty, were proud to see their father vindicated and recognized for doing his job correctly. The congressional hearings resulted in legislation requiring better coordination between agencies responsible for diplomatic security. The law established clear communication requirements, and accountability measures to prevent future incidents. The police union used Marcus's case as an example of why officers needed strong representation and due process protections. His experience demonstrated how quickly careers could be jeopardized by circumstances beyond an officer's control. Marcus was promoted to sergeant 6 months after his reinstatement, with supervisors noting his professionalism during the crisis and his contributions to improving departmental procedures. The promotion helped restore his confidence and his belief in the system. The relationship between the two countries actually improved as a result of how the incident was handled. The diplomatic resolution demonstrated both nations' commitment to fairness and cooperation, strengthening their ongoing trade and security partnerships. Captain Hartwell and Marcus maintained occasional contact, sharing perspectives on security challenges and diplomatic protocol. Their unusual friendship became a symbol of how professional respect could transcend cultural and political differences. The incident was eventually featured in a documentary about diplomatic security challenges. Marcus and Captain Hartwell both participated in interviews, providing different perspectives on the same events and the lessons learned from the experience. New training programs for law enforcement officers now include specific modules on diplomatic protocol and international relations. Marcus often serves as an instructor, sharing his firsthand experience of how quickly routine assignments can become international incidents. The hotel where the incident occurred implemented new security procedures based on lessons learned from the event. Their staff now receives regular training on handling diplomatic events and coordinating with multiple security agencies. Marcus's story became required reading at the police academy, illustrating both the importance of quick decision-making in security situations and the complex consequences that can result from international incidents. The disruptive individual who had triggered the entire chain of events was eventually prosecuted for planning to disrupt the diplomatic event. The case revealed the extent of the threat that Marcus had unknowingly helped prevent. Captain Hartwell returned to his duties with the Royal Guard but became an advocate for better international coordination in security matters. He often spoke about the importance of understanding different cultural approaches to law enforcement and diplomacy. Years later, Marcus reflected on how the incident had shaped his career and his understanding of law enforcement's role in international relations. What had begun as the worst day of his professional life had ultimately made him a better officer and a more thoughtful person. The protocols and procedures developed as a result of the incident have been adopted by police departments across the country. Marcus's experience continues to influence how law enforcement agencies prepare for and handle diplomatic security assignments. The resolution of the case demonstrated that even serious international incidents could be resolved through patience, investigation, and good faith efforts from all parties involved. It became a model for handling similar diplomatic crises in the future.